live.
Hello, this is Shara Evans, and I'm a technology futurist. And unfortunately, this is a pre recorded session because we ran into what else? Technical difficulties with me being a technology futurist and doing the live stream event. So I am very disappointed that you're not getting to hear me live, but I've got some amazing material that I'd love to share with you today about not only the world of the future, but some of the things that are happening in our world that are causing massive changes and disruptions to our lives, our businesses, to the legal profession, to the work that you as in-house attorneys do, and to all of human society. But I also want to talk a bit about the future too, and some of the new jobs that technologies will be creating for us and the future of humanity. So let me start by taking you first on a ride into the future with some of the amazing new technologies that are not only starting to be developed now, in many cases already being deployed. If I had to pick just one technology that is going to be the most important technology in the decade and decades to come, I would say it's artificial intelligence. And when I use the term AI, I'm using it as a big umbrella term. So it includes techniques like machine learning and deep learning, but it also includes things like natural language processing, being able to understand written text, being able to understand and make sense of someone's voice and react in either text or voice. It includes emotion detection. It includes software like chatbots and virtual digital assistants. It includes things like physical robots and even driverless cars, and the list goes on and on and on. Now, the fuel for AI learning is actually big data, and we're generating terabytes of data every single day, more data than any human could read through in a lifetime. And that has a lot of implications. But there's one more technology that we need to add to the mix here that's going to actually add rocket fuel to artificial intelligence, and that is quantum computing. Now, this is still very experimental, and I'm not going to go deep into quantum physics, but to put it very simply, if you can imagine a laptop in 10 years' time that has the processing capabilities of banks of supercomputers, then you'll start to get a hint of what is possible with quantum computing if today's experiments start to pan out. You marry that up with artificial intelligence, and you can get some pretty smart software. Another technology that is being worked on in research labs all around the world is nanobot technology. So here I'm talking about teensy, teensy, tiny little robots that are microscopic. And this isn't science fiction. It sounds like sci fi, but it's science today. The picture that I'm showing you now is just an illustrative graphic. But to give you an idea of where this is going and what the implications are, let me share an example of a collaboration between a nanotech institute in China that took place a couple of years ago in conjunction with Arizona State University, where they literally designed a nanobot that was capable of detecting a particular type of tumor in a person, well, in a mouse, actually, not a person, and using the protein that basically tells this nanobot that it's a tumor of a particular type. It uses techniques to unfurl DNA and inject drugs directly into the spot where the tumor is and literally cuts off the blood supply of that tumor, shrinks it, and kills it. And they've used it already in live mice. Now, this is still experimental, but if you can imagine what the implications for this technology are going into the future, wow, it's incredible. So, where does that leave us with the future of health? And will the medical advances that we're working on in research labs all around the world today maybe allow us someday as humans to live forever? Well, there are a couple of key technologies that are really important here. One is stem cells, and there are a lot of research labs around the world that have been doing amazing work with stem cells, including being able to bioprint things like veins and arteries and living skin, use it for drug testing, and eventually we will be able to bioprint, that is 3D print with biological materials, things like a replacement heart or a replacement kidney. So if you need a transplant, you're not going to need to wait for a donor. You will use your own stem cells and they will bioprint a new heart replacement for you that fits your heart cavity exactly with no immune rejection. Then we have genetic engineering. And again, a lot of work has been happening in this area. We've already mapped the human genome system. There are about 3 billion genomes. We haven't understood what all the base pairs mean yet. But once we do, then we will be able to start tinkering at a genetic level and do things like find the cause of a particular disease, let's say cystic fibrosis, and turn that gene off. But it can go well beyond that. We might someday be able to figure out which genes control aging and turn those off or turn those backwards. And there are already experiments today in the research labs where scientists are doing just that, but with mice, not with people. But there are scientists who also believe that within the next 10 or 15 years or so, we'll be able to find the gene that controls human longevity. And when we do, our lives might go to 400 years or 800 years. Can you imagine working for 400 years? Or even being married to the same person for 800 years? Imagine the profound impacts of society that would have. And then, of course, you've got nanobots. And here, if you combine all of these things together, we're talking about precision medicine that can help us live longer and healthier lives. One of my favorite topics to talk about is space travel. And frankly, with this topic, it doesn't get more science fiction than thinking about exploring outer space. But yesterday's science fiction is rapidly becoming today's science fact. And a lot of it is being driven by private industry. In fact, it's the recent invention of reusable rockets that is propelling a brand new space age. And there are a lot of different companies that are investing in these technologies that will allow us to initially explore our solar system and then eventually perhaps even the wider galaxy. Already, we have plans from many different countries as well as private industry to do explorations on the moon and Mars, literally going back out into outer space. And the habitats of the future may very well look something like this, where we literally have humans living on all different planets. Scientists have recently discovered that there are at least 2,400 exoplanets just in our galaxy that they can identify. Not all are human habitable, but they believe that in our one galaxy alone, there will be 300 million planets that are capable of supporting human life. And two more discoveries that are very recent. One is that in the sunlit side of the moon, there's actually water. And also on Mars, in a number of recent probes, we've known that there's water up in the polar cap regions, but it looks like from time to time this water may flow, and that's really important for the potential of exploring outer space. These are whole new industries that will involve a lot of regulations. And although your company may not be thinking about real estate in outer space right now, you might want to be thinking about how can your company start to get involved in some of these space undertakings. So let's go back to the here and now. You know, this whole new normal coronavirus, our life has changed. And frankly, we're in for what I would say a corona coaster of twists and turns. And, you know, screaming on a roller coaster is one thing, but the screams that we're hearing now are a lot different. It's like, when are we going to get out of lockdown? When am I going to be able to travel internationally? When will I be able to go back to work? Will my business survive closures? Will the lockdowns end? Or will we have something that takes us in and out of lockdown over a prolonged period of time? And when will there be a vaccine, if there is one, that's safe and effective? And will people take it? You know, there are all kinds of questions, moral and ethical and economic, that flow out of this situation that we find ourselves in today. One thing is for sure, and that is that remote working is here to stay. Even if we had a magical cure tomorrow, what we are finding is that a lot of people actually like being able to have work life balance. And frankly, when it comes to getting back to any semblance of a more normal type of life, there are all kinds of forecasts that I've been reading about. The most optimistic is that it's probably 2023 before that happens, but it could be all the way as far out as 2030. So if we're going to work from home and have our staff work from home, we need to make sure that they are equipped properly. We need to make sure that they have the right kind of cybersecurity and virtual private networks and IT support. They need to have not just tiny laptops, but big screens so that they're more productive. They need to have ergonomic furniture. And by the way, they're using space in their home and electricity. So companies may end up having to pay staff who work from home an additional stipend to be able to use a part of their house or offset the cost of additional electricity. Today, if I look at the city streets, not just here in Sydney where I'm at, but around the world, we're seeing lockdowns that are happening on and off, and a lot of streets that are just deserted, and big office buildings that have lots and lots of space for people, but are barely occupied. This is going to have a profound impact on the commercial real estate holdings of many companies. And as in house attorneys, you're going to be required to look at what kind of contractual obligations do you have with respect to commercial real estate, and also have a think about what the flow on impact is about the small businesses surrounding the area where you may have your corporate headquarters. Some of them may not be able to survive a prolonged lockdown period, and the amenities that your staff is accustomed to may not be there when it's time to go back full force, if indeed that happens. So, what are some of the things that companies or governments can do to ensure safety as people go into office buildings or into supermarkets or any other kind of venue? Well, it turns out that there's an amazing deployment of robots that are coming online over the last 6 months that use ultraviolet light, just like from the sun, to be able to disinfect areas. Now, it's a rather slow and laborious process because it takes about 15 minutes or so to disinfect a relatively small area, and there are lots of different bots out there. This is one that's from Thailand. It's called Germ Saver. It's just an example of them. But this is the sort of thing that companies will need to take into consideration as they start to reopen their offices. How are we going to keep our offices or our stores safe? And this is one way of doing it. Another new innovation has to do with mobile disinfectant doors. And this is a really new, neat technology that literally uses the same kind of disinfecting technology that's used in some of these UV robots, but in the form of a doorway that can be moved around. The example that I'm showing is from KLC King, and it's only one of many. And literally, it does a 720-degree disinfection process as you walk through a door.
Jobs.
Another thing that you will be seeing as we move into the future is the use of virtual reality or perhaps augmented reality to start designing offices of the future that use a lot of technology, but also account for social distancing and other requirements to keep people safe. And the people who design these new offices will be in a category called Office of the Future Designers, which is one of the new jobs of the future that I think we will be seeing. In the meantime, we're seeing an acceleration in the rollout of smart city technology. So we're talking about the Internet of Things, we're talking about faster rollout of 5G mobile technology, we're talking about environmental safety, lots and lots of different examples of what the cities of the future will look like. But let me give you one example from Chicago where they're doing some things really right and a couple of things that I'm not too happy with. So I was out there a couple of years ago, and they were in the middle of deploying a project which was then called Array of Things. It's now since been called SAGE. And these look like these little beehive type of things that you see on the left side of my picture. And they're posted on light poles, and I've seen them in person. And inside are all kinds of sensors that measure barometric pressure, pollutants, ambient noise, whether it's from vehicles or anything else, pedestrian traffic, you name it, these sensors start to capture it. And the data that is captured is being made open source. So it's used by city planners, but it's also used by app developers. So if you can imagine that you have asthma and you want to walk between your home and your office, and you want to do it in a place that has the least number of pollutants that might irritate your asthma, and also have some pedestrians around you so that you're safe as you do your walking. Well, that's a great source of open data that can be used for all kinds of apps. On the bad side, however, Chicago has also started to track ride sharing, and they have this open source ride sharing database. And I've looked at it a few times over the last few years, recently, just a few weeks ago. And it literally captures your pickup point and your drop off point with GPS coordinates. And me being me, I copied the GPS coordinates into Google Map. And guess what? I could see the building where someone was picked up and the place where they were dropped off. If I were using more sophisticated tools like SQL or a GIS system, I could literally start to plot out people's lives and when they might be home or not be home. And frankly, that level of detail does not need to be shared. You can share GPS coordinates that are down to a block level rather than a building level and accomplish the same sort of things. So we need to be careful in terms of privacy and smart cities, exactly what kind of data we're sharing. Another new development that has really taken off since the pandemic is the use of virtual reality to do inspections of property. Now, this is a trend that started well before coronavirus, but it's just been accelerated because people have been in lockdowns. You can't have people come through your house to inspect it for safety reasons, even if you're not in a lockdown. And it's also being used in the commercial property sector. I was talking to some colleagues in that area in California, and they're using literally this same technology to look at commercial real estate buying and selling as well. Another area that you will want to look at as in-house attorneys and hopefully part of the corporate executive team is the move to re-onshoring your supply chain and manufacturing. I cannot tell you how many products that I would normally purchase that have just been out of stock on a sustained basis. And re-onshoring manufacturing could involve reactivating or building factories, but it may also involve 3D printing, also called additive manufacturing. And that's not just plasticky stuff anymore. There are industrial grade 3D printers that do metal, all kinds of metallic objects that actually build entire homes using construction refuse. There are even experimental organic level 3D printers that could allow a pharmaceutical company to get the CAD file for a particular drug that they manufacture, maybe off seas today, and it's not available in Australia, and be able to manufacture it here. A lot of potential there. Unfortunately, a lot of industries have been absolutely decimated by COVID, and one of them is the airline industry. I'm a keynote speaker. I'm used to flying around the world, and I can say I haven't been doing that at all this year. My events tend to be from my home office and occasionally from a client site in Sydney where I'm based. But the airline industry around the world has been absolutely decimated. A couple of ideas for those of you who may be in the airline industry is that one thing that you may consider is reconfiguring your fleet of planes so that they are largely cargo planes and only have a small section where you carry passengers, and maybe they have spacing like a business class or first class compartment does today. Another thing to consider if you're in the airline industry, the skills that you have as a pilot and crew translate very well to the same skills that will be used in space travel. There'll also be a lot of changes for the legal profession. And frankly, in this era that we're in right now, there are a lot of new risk factors that need to be considered. And sometimes legal counsel is a member of the executive team or board of directors. In other cases, in-house legal counsel is not. I think with some of the risks that are inherent in today's environment, it's going to be increasingly relevant and recommended that legal counsel is part of the executive team. And that's going to also mean some profound changes, perhaps in the way that your organization is structured. Unfortunately, another outcome of the pandemic is that here in Australia, we're actually in a recession for the first time in 30 years. And let's hope it ends at a recession and it doesn't go into a depression. In other parts of the world, it's not looking very good. I think we're relatively lucky here, but there are a lot of economic impacts on both a business and a personal level. We're in austerity mode right now, and that has impacts for your clients, whether they're other businesses or consumers. People are just not sure of what's coming next. And that's, business people as well as individuals. And that means we're seeing a new mode of austerity. But let's go to some good news. Let's talk about some of the jobs in the future and some of the things that let's assume, we get past all the hurdles that we're in now and what kind of new jobs there are going to be, not just as a result of the pandemic, but also largely driven by all of these emerging technologies that are available today. Well, one of them is an AI trainer. And artificial intelligence, as I said before, is absolutely vital to the functioning of almost every business that I can think of. And it's a part of our everyday lives, whether we know it or not. But there are some ethical issues as well. A really simple example is think about a driverless car. Somehow, somebody is making decisions about what happens with a car when there is an unavoidable accident. Who will get hurt? Will it be the passengers in the car? Perhaps a pedestrian that just walked in front of the car because they were too busy texting to look up from their smartphone? Will different car manufacturers have different rules that apply? There are a lot of ethical issues that go along with AI. Another really big one has to do with the databases that we feed AI with deep learning and machine learning techniques, because inherent in these big databases are the same social biases that we see in social media, commentary, and in all the other things that we humans do. And we need to ensure that if we deploy AI in our business, it actually acts in a manner that represents the values of our company. Now, one way of doing this is through AI trainers that use a technique called that use a technique called reinforcement learning to help steer an AI towards making the right decisions. But there are some other things to consider as well from an ethical position, and that is as AI starts making decisions on behalf of your company, you need to be aware that the law as written today, and I'm talking broadly around the globe, is based on actions that humans take. Now, what is the implication of the law when an AI is the one that's making the decision and a human may not be in the loop? A lot of work for lawyers here, both in-house legal and regulatory and government. Now, with every technology, there's always a dark side, and some of you may have heard of a technology called deep fakes. It's using artificial intelligence to take a video of a person and a voice of a person, but actually make it look and sound like someone else. So there have been some pretty famous videos out there. One was a comedian, Jordan Peele, who imitated former President Barack Obama and did a really good job of it. And, when you look at the lip sync and everything else, it looks very, very real. I think in the near future, let's say 2 to 3 years, we might see real-time video getting hacked, and instead of talking about a merger and an acquisition deal or other sensitive client data with a trusted colleague or maybe one of your clients, and you're looking at them and they look like the person that you are accustomed to talking to, they sound like them, they even have the right background, but it's not them. And you've accidentally disclosed information which requires ASX disclosure if you're a public listed company before you announce it to the market, but you've been tricked into doing this. So one of the questions that I would ask you is, if that were to happen, if someone was actually tricked by a deep fake, who would be responsible? Would it be the person who's tricked? Would it be this cyber criminal who's actually done this nefarious deed? Would it be the video conferencing company that maybe had a bug in their software, or would it be someone else? So I think we're going to see a new job category called reality confirmers coming up in the next couple of years. Another new job that's been on the horizon for a while is the chief ethics officer. And I've already hinted at some of the issues with AI and ethics, but the whole idea of ethics goes well beyond artificial intelligence. It has to do with all the different technologies that we're using. And not only that, but where do we as companies have responsibility to our staff members, to our clients, and to consumers to ensure that any kind of software or hardware or actions that we take are deployed in an ethical manner. This has been called by some people who've listened to me over the years the other CEO, and I think it's going to end up being a prominent C-suite position. Another very new aspect that is becoming increasingly worrying for me is the absolute utter lack of attention to privacy in many, many different sectors. So, for many years now, we have been seeing all kinds of privacy breaches, either done by cyber criminals or perhaps inadvertently by companies who did not put in appropriate password protections. But it's actually getting very serious and very common. I cannot tell you how many times I have companies that have sent information to me by email or asked me to send information that literally contains extremely sensitive data, things like date of birth, and they just think, well, send it by email, it's okay. I'm sorry, no, it's not okay. If you send information by email, it's unencrypted and it goes through many, many hops along the way out of your server to wherever the person is that you're sending an email to and from. And it's stored at every one of these servers along the way. There are some very, very stringent privacy guidelines with respect to the use of sensitive information that are now part of the law. A couple of years ago in Europe, we saw the passage of GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, which has to do with the collection and breaching of personal sensitive data for EU citizens anywhere in the world, including here in Australia. And if you breach those laws, then you could be subject to fines the greater of 20 million euros or 4% of your global revenue. Here in Australia, we have recently strengthened our privacy laws as well. And you would want to look at Section 6 of the Privacy Act, because starting in June of this year, companies that are repeat offenders, and it may only be 2 times, have massive fines that they may be responsible for paying. And this would apply to, in general, companies with turnovers of at least $3 million. So the fines could be the greater of $10 million or 10% of your corporate annual turnover, or 3 times the benefit that you might accrue through these privacy breaches. So it's really important that as in-house attorneys, you're looking at these privacy issues. Do you have a privacy officer? Have you done an external privacy audit, not only of the data that you collect and store, but also how you go about sending and receiving information from consumers? If you're sending out a form to a consumer and you want them to fill out information that includes their birth date, their health record information, their home address, and all sorts of other things, and then send it to you by email, you're most likely breaching privacy laws and doing it on a massive scale. So this is something that is extremely important. And I think that we're going to see a whole new job of the future called a privacy guardian that will act on behalf either of companies or on individuals, or maybe even as an expert witness to stop some of these privacy violations from occurring. Human resources is also going to change in the very near future, largely because of the introduction of software bots, AI, as well as physical robots. And I think HR is very soon going to stand for the head of human and robotic orchestration. So, not just human resources, but also looking at how do we best deploy the tools that we have, whether they be people and our valuable skill sets and intellectual capital as human beings, software AI programs and physical robots, and use it to turn our company into an agile marketing machine. And with the coronavirus and this threat of the pandemic possibly going on and off in waves over a long period, another function is going to be increasingly important in the HR space, and that is human wellness. And I'm not talking just physical, but also mental, because this disease has had not only a physical impact on people, but also a mental impact as well. So going into the future, are we likely to take these technologies into our body? Will we become part machines? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. Already in the world of medicine, we have pacemakers, we have insulin pumps, we have bionic ears. We're already starting down that path for medical purposes. But will we continue further down that path for non-medical purposes? Well, one of the ideas that is gaining a lot of currency over the last couple of years is actually putting chips in our heads to merge our brains with machines. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm probably not going to be first in line to get a chip in my head. However, the research with this started from a medical perspective, with researchers looking at diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia, where people were losing their memory, and trying to design techniques, which were these little chips that help store memories and let people retrieve memories. Then we started to move into this era where people like Elon Musk and many others started to think about, well, why don't we put an AI sublayer in our neocortex and arm us humans with AI superintelligence directly in our brains and connect our brains up into the internet so that we can literally think a question and get an answer from whatever the World Wide Web of the 2030s or 2040s might be. Now, Elon Musk has founded a company called Neuralink that many of you have heard of. That was the initial goal, but then they went back more to the medical side of things and started to develop chips, really tiny chips, that were designed to help people who had paralysis due to having a severed spinal column and helping them to start walk again. Now, that is hugely beneficial, but some of the more recent research has been involved with emotion control. And there are experiments at DARPA with many different universities looking at this as well, having chips in our brains, literally monitoring our nervous systems and our thoughts for patterns or hormonal discrepancies, and possibly emitting chemicals to start controlling how we feel about things. Well, that starts to get a bit weird and wacky. But then think about this. Who owns that chip in your brain? Is it a social media company that might actually be harvesting every thought that you have and possibly on-selling it to third parties? Is it a medical device, and who has access to it? How do you update that? Is it wireless? That's the way that things are going. And if it's wireless and you're nearby, it could probably be hacked into, just like insulin pumps and pacemakers have already been hacked into through wireless interfaces. But more importantly, is what if we have this AI chip in our brains and it starts to do auto correct or auto anticipate? How many of you have sent a text message and it does autocorrect and you end up sending out nonsense? Can you imagine if you had a chip in your brain that suddenly does an autocorrect and you physically do things that you would not have done in the real world if this chip wasn't in control of your body? An example would be, imagine that you're driving in traffic and somebody cuts you off and it scares the you know what out of you. And for a fleeting moment, you think somebody ought to ram that so and so. You have no intention whatsoever of actually doing it, but the AI chip is not able to make that distinction between a fleeting thought and something that you actually intend to do. Who will be responsible for that action? The person or the chip designer or somebody else? You know, there are some real moral and ethical issues. And worst case is, my gosh, what if somebody hacks into your brain? What are you going to do? Are you going to completely erase the contents of your brain and reset it like you would do a computer? I don't think so. We don't even have the technology on the drawing board for that to happen yet. So our future is very, very interesting. And I'm so disappointed that we're not getting to do the live Q&A because I would absolutely love to take your questions. But I am very, very passionate about the world of privacy and particularly concerned about the number of companies that just don't seem to have a clue about how email works and how data networking works and sending sensitive information through insecure methods. So what I would like to do is make a very, very special offer to members of ACC Australia. And if you contact me through my website, which is sharaevans.com, just go up on the right side and you'll see contact. I will do a free 15-minute consultation with you about what you're doing with privacy and security in your company. And the reason I'm doing this is that I've been a strategic consultant for many decades. I've literally designed data networks from scratch. I've designed email systems from scratch. And I really want to see people and companies protected. And I hope you're able to get in touch with me. If not for that, then to ask me any questions that you might have. I hope you have a wonderful session. Thank you so very much for your time today. It's disappointing that I didn't get to talk to you live and in person, but I hope that you enjoyed this recorded session nonetheless. Thank you very much.